The bullets came through the canopy at 400 miles per hour. Lieutenant Robert Johnson watched them chew through the cockpit of Charlie Miller's P-51 Mustang. Not heard them. Watched them. At 23,000 feet over France, the tracers looked like angry orange hornets tearing metal apart in slow motion. Miller's aircraft staggered left, then rolled inverted. Smoke poured from the engine cowling. Johnson keyed his radio. "Charlie, bail out. Get out now." No response. The Mustang continued its inverted roll, picking up speed, falling toward the French countryside 5 miles below. Through his canopy, Johnson could see Miller slumped forward in the cockpit. Dead or unconscious. It did not matter which. Johnson yanked his stick hard left and shoved the throttle forward. The Focke-Wulf 190 that had killed Miller was already turning back toward the bomber formation. Johnson had maybe 3 seconds to line up a shot. His Mustang accelerated, but not fast enough. The German fighter pulled into a climb, using its superior rate of roll to escape. Johnson fired anyway. His .650 caliber machine guns lit up the sky. Every tracer went wide. The Focke-Wulf disappeared into a cloud bank. Gone. Johnson pulled back on his stick and tried to follow, but his Mustang mushed through the climb like it was moving through mud. By the time he reached the cloud bank, the German was already a mile away. Johnson could see him through a gap in the clouds, waggling his wings, mocking him. Charlie Miller hit the ground outside Reims at terminal velocity. Johnson saw the impact flash from 4 miles up. There was no parachute. There never had been. That made 3 aircraft lost in 15 minutes. 3 pilots who would never walk into the briefing room again. 3 sets of personal effects that somebody would have to pack up and ship home. The kill board in the operations tent would stay the same, but the list of names on the duty roster would get shorter. Johnson landed 30 minutes later. His hands were shaking when he climbed out of the cockpit. Not from fear, from rage. His crew chief, a mechanic named Sam Harmon, was waiting by the wing. Harmon had been working on Mustangs since they arrived in England 8 months ago. He knew every bolt, every fuel line, every temperamental quirk of the Packard Merlin engine. He also knew when a pilot came back angry instead of scared. Johnson pulled off his oxygen mask and threw it into the cockpit. "I had him. I had a clean shot on the guy who killed Miller, and my plane could not keep up in the climb. 4 seconds. That is all I needed. 4 more seconds of acceleration." Harmon said nothing. He had heard this speech before from other pilots. The Mustang was fast. It was reliable. It could fly all the way to Berlin and back. But in a knife fight, with a Focke-Wulf or a Messerschmitt, especially below 15,000 feet, the German fighters could outclimb and outroll the American plane. That was just physics. The Luftwaffe had been building fighters for 6 years. They knew what they were doing. Johnson walked away from the aircraft without another word. He did not go to the debriefing. He did not eat dinner. He sat in his barracks and stared at Miller's empty bunk. Miller had been talking about his fiancée the night before, a girl from Ohio named Dorothy. They were supposed to get married in June. Miller had shown everyone the ring he was planning to send home. Now Dorothy was going to get a telegram instead. At midnight, Johnson walked back to the maintenance hangar. The base was quiet. Most of the crews were asleep. A single light burned in the corner, where Harmon was still working on an engine that had thrown a cylinder during the morning mission. Harmon looked up when Johnson walked in. He set down his wrench. "You should be asleep." "I need more power," Johnson said. Harmon wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to the workbench. "Every pilot who loses a wingman says that. You think you are the first guy to ask me for a faster plane? I do not care if I am the first or the 100th. I need more power. Just enough to stay with a German fighter in a climb. Just enough to close the gap when I need to take the shot. That is all." Harmon shook his head. "The Merlin engine in your plane is already putting out 1,500 horsepower. You want more? You need a bigger engine. We do not have bigger engines." Johnson stepped closer. "Then we modify the one I have." "No." "Why not?" "Because modifications mean paperwork. Paperwork means officers asking questions. Officers asking questions means we both end up in front of a court-martial board explaining why we decided to ignore every maintenance regulation in the manual." Johnson grabbed the edge of the workbench. His voice dropped. "Charlie Miller is dead because I could not catch the fighter that killed him. Tomorrow it might be someone else. Next week it might be me. I am not asking you to redesign the plane. I am asking you to give me an edge. Anything. Just enough to make a difference." Harmon stared at him for a long moment. Then he walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a sheet of paper covered in performance charts and fuel specifications. He laid it on the workbench. "The Merlin engine is designed to run on 100-octane fuel at 61 inches of manifold pressure. That is the safe limit. Go past that, and you risk detonation. The engine starts tearing itself apart from the inside." "How far past?" Harmon tapped the chart. "There is a fuel depot 3 miles from here. They supply experimental aircraft, high-performance test beds. The stuff they have is 130 octane. Maybe higher. The higher the octane, the more compression the fuel can handle before it explodes. If you mix that with our standard fuel, you can push the manifold pressure higher. Maybe 70 inches, maybe 75. How much more power is that? 200 horsepower, maybe 250, for short bursts." Johnson felt his heart rate pick up. 200 extra horsepower. That was the difference between watching a German fighter escape and putting him in the ground. "What is the cost?" Johnson asked. Harmon folded his arms. "The cost is, you get about 5 minutes of full power before the engine temperature goes past redline. After that, you are cooking the cylinders. You might make it back to base. You might have to bail out over France. You might also blow the engine mid-flight and turn into a fireball at 20,000 feet. Can you get the fuel? That is not the question. Then what is?" Harmon leaned against the workbench. "The question is whether you understand that if this goes wrong, we are both finished. Not just grounded. Not just reprimanded. They will court-martial us for sabotage. Unauthorized modifications to military aircraft during wartime. That is a prison sentence. Maybe worse." Johnson looked at the chart on the workbench. He thought about Miller. He thought about the Focke-Wulf waggling its wings. He thought about Dorothy in Ohio, opening a telegram. "I understand," Johnson said. Harmon studied him. Then he nodded. "I will get the fuel. But you do not tell anyone, not your wingman, not your squadron leader. Nobody. This conversation never happened." Johnson extended his hand. Harmon shook it. 2 nights later, Harmon drove a supply truck to the experimental fuel depot and returned with 2 jerry cans of high-octane gasoline. He mixed it in the hangar after midnight, measuring carefully. 50-50 blend. Half standard fuel, half experimental. He poured it into Johnson's Mustang by flashlight, working quickly. The next morning, Johnson walked out to his aircraft for a routine patrol. Everything looked normal. The fuel gauge read full. The engine turned over smoothly during pre-flight checks. But Johnson could feel the difference. It was psychological, maybe. Or maybe it was real. The engine sounded sharper. The throttle response felt crisper. He released the brakes and began his takeoff roll. The Mustang accelerated down the runway, lifting off at 110 miles per hour. Johnson climbed to 2,000 feet and leveled off, flying east toward France. He reached for the throttle. His hand hovered over it. Then he pushed it forward. Past 61 inches of manifold pressure. Past 65. Past 70. The Mustang lunged forward like it had been kicked. The airspeed indicator jumped. Johnson felt himself pressed back into his seat. The engine roared. The whole aircraft vibrated. He glanced at the manifold pressure gauge, 72 inches. The cylinder head temperature was climbing. Fast. And then he saw them. 4 Focke-Wulf 190s, 2 miles ahead, climbing hard toward a formation of B-17 bombers. Johnson pushed the throttle to 75 inches and dove. The 4 Focke-Wulfs never saw him coming. Johnson came out of the sun at 450 miles per hour. His airspeed indicator was redlined. The Mustang was shaking so hard, his vision blurred. But he was closing the distance faster than he ever had before. The German fighters were still climbing toward the bomber formation, completely focused on their target. Johnson picked the trailing aircraft. He centered it in his gun sight. At 300 yards, he opened fire. 6 .50 caliber machine guns erupted. The tracers walked up the fuselage of the Focke-Wulf and into the cockpit. The canopy shattered. The German fighter rolled left and fell away, trailing smoke. The other 3 fighters broke formation instantly. They scattered like startled birds. Johnson pulled hard on the stick and felt the G-forces slam him down into his seat. His vision started to gray at the edges. He eased off slightly and rolled right, tracking the second Focke-Wulf. This one was better. The German pilot threw his aircraft into a scissors maneuver, reversing direction twice in 3 seconds. It was a defensive move designed to force an attacker to overshoot. Johnson had seen it a dozen times. Usually it worked. Not today. Johnson stayed with him. The extra power from the modified fuel kept his speed up through the turns. He fired a 2-second burst, missed, adjusted, fired again. This time, the rounds chewed through the Focke-Wulf's left wing. The wing folded upward and tore off. The German fighter spun into the clouds. Johnson's engine temperature gauge was climbing into the red. He had maybe 2 minutes before the cylinders started to cook. He scanned the sky. The other 2 Focke-Wulfs had disappeared. Smart. They had seen 2 of their squadron mates go down in 30 seconds and decided survival was more important than glory. Johnson throttled back to normal power. The engine temperature began to drop. His hands were trembling on the stick, not from fear, from adrenaline. He had just killed 2 German fighters in less than a minute. His previous record was 1 kill in a 15-minute dogfight. He keyed his radio. Blue Leader, this is Blue 3. 2 bandits down, Sector 4, returning to base. The squadron leader's voice crackled back. Blue 3, confirmed 2 kills? Confirmed. There was a pause. Good shooting. See you on the ground. Johnson turned west and began the flight back to England. His fuel gauge was lower than he expected. The high-octane mixture burned faster. He would need to talk to Harmon about that. He landed 20 minutes later. The ground crew was already waiting. Word had spread about the kills. 2 fighters in 1 engagement was rare. Mechanics and armament techs were gathered near the hardstand, watching as Johnson taxied in. Harmon was there too, standing apart from the others. His face was neutral, but his eyes were locked on the engine cowling, looking for signs of damage. Smoke. Anything that would indicate the modified fuel had caused a problem. Johnson shut down the engine and climbed out. The cowling was hot to the touch, hotter than normal. But there was no visible damage, no oil leaks, no burned metal. Harmon walked over as the crowd dispersed. He kept his voice low. "How did it run?" "Like a different airplane," Johnson said quietly. "I was doing 450 in level flight. I have never seen that before." "Engine temperature?" "Hit the red." "I backed off after about 90 seconds of full throttle." Harmon nodded. "That is about what I expected. You got lucky. If you had pushed it another 30 seconds, you would have seized a piston. It was enough. This time." Johnson looked at him. "I need more fuel. Enough for at least 3 more flights." Harmon glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "You are pushing your luck. Someone is going to notice eventually. Your fuel consumption is going to be off. Your engine performance is going to show up in the maintenance logs. There are people whose job is to catch exactly this kind of thing. Then we need to be careful. Careful does not mean invisible. You just shot down 2 fighters in under a minute. People are going to start asking questions about how you did it." Johnson wiped the sweat off his face. "Let them ask. I will tell them I got lucky. Sun was at my back. Germans were distracted. Whatever they want to hear." Harmon shook his head but said nothing. He walked back to the hangar, and Johnson headed to the debriefing room. The intelligence officer was a captain named Stevens. He had been in England for 6 months and had never flown a combat mission. His job was to document kills, assess tactics, and write reports that would eventually make their way up the chain of command. Stevens gestured to a chair. "Have a seat, Lieutenant. Let us talk about what happened up there." Johnson sat down and recounted the engagement. He kept it simple. Spotted the enemy fighters. Dove out of the sun. Got the first one by surprise. The second one tried to evade but failed. Both kills were clean. Stevens took notes. "Your wingman reported that you were moving significantly faster than normal. He said he could not keep up with you during the dive." Johnson felt his pulse quicken. "I had altitude advantage. Gravity does most of the work. He also said your engine sounded different, louder, like you were running at higher power settings than standard." "The Merlin engine is loud," Johnson said, "especially in a dive." Stevens looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded and closed his notebook. "All right. Good work out there. We will get your kills confirmed and added to the board." Johnson left the debriefing room and walked back to the barracks. His heart was still pounding. Stevens was suspicious. Not enough to push harder. Not yet. But enough to pay attention. That night, Johnson lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. The base was quiet except for the distant sound of engines being tested in the maintenance area. Charlie Miller's bunk was still empty. No one had moved into it yet. No one wanted to. Johnson thought about the 2 Focke-Wulfs he had shot down. He thought about the speed, the power, the way the Mustang had responded when he pushed the throttle forward. He also thought about what Harmon had said. Someone is going to notice eventually. Johnson rolled over and closed his eyes. Let them notice. He would deal with that when it happened. Right now, he had an advantage, and he was going to use it. 3 days later, Harmon filled Johnson's fuel tanks with another batch of the modified mixture. This time he did it in the middle of the afternoon, in plain sight, using standard fuel cans. No sneaking around, no midnight runs. If anyone asked, it was just routine maintenance. No one asked. Johnson flew 2 more missions that week. He shot down 1 Messerschmitt on the first flight. On the second flight, he damaged another and forced it to break off from a bomber formation. The kill board in the operations tent now showed 7 confirmed kills next to his name. A month ago, he had 4. Other pilots started asking him questions. What was his secret? How was he getting into position so quickly? Was he using a different tactic? Johnson shrugged and said he was just getting better at reading the enemy, anticipating their moves, exploiting mistakes. Most of them believed him. A few did not. One of them was a pilot named Keller. He had been flying Mustangs for over a year and had 11 kills. He was also smart. Smart enough to notice things that others missed. Keller cornered Johnson in the mess hall one evening. I flew behind you yesterday during the engagement over Hanover. Your plane was outrunning mine by at least 30 miles per hour. Same altitude, same throttle settings. How is that possible? Johnson kept his expression neutral. Maybe your plane needs a tune-up. My plane is fine. I checked with my crew chief. Everything is within spec. Then maybe I am just better at managing my energy. Keller leaned in closer. Or maybe you are doing something you are not supposed to be doing. Johnson met his eyes. If you have an accusation, make it. Otherwise, stop wasting my time. Keller stared at him for a moment. Then he stepped back. Just be careful, Johnson. Whatever you are doing, it is going to catch up with you eventually. He walked away, leaving Johnson standing alone in the mess hall. Johnson finished his dinner and went back to his barracks. He knew Keller was right. The advantage he had was temporary. Sooner or later, someone with authority would start asking the same questions. And when that happened, he would have to make a choice. Stop using the modified fuel and go back to being an average pilot. Or keep using it and risk everything. Johnson thought about Charlie Miller. He thought about Dorothy in Ohio. He thought about all the pilots who were going to die in the next month because their planes were not fast enough. Then he walked to the hangar and told Harmon to mix another batch. The engine exploded at 18,000 feet. Not Johnson's engine. The engine of a pilot named Davis, 200 yards to his left. 1 second, Davis was flying in formation. The next second, his Mustang was trailing fire and pieces of cowling. The propeller tore free and tumbled through the sky like a coin flipped by a giant. Davis managed to bail out, but his parachute opened less than 1,000 feet above the English Channel. Johnson watched him hit the water. A rescue boat was already moving toward the splash point, but the cold would kill Davis in minutes if the impact had not already done it. The squadron landed 15 minutes later. Johnson climbed out of his cockpit and saw the maintenance crews gathered in a tight circle near the operations building. Their faces were grim. Harmon was among them, arms crossed, listening to the chief maintenance officer. Johnson walked over but stayed on the edge of the group. The chief was holding a clipboard and speaking in the clipped tone of someone delivering bad news. Davis pushed his manifold pressure past redline during the engagement. 78 inches. The engine could not handle it. Detonation in cylinder 3. That caused a cascade failure. By the time he realized what was happening, half the engine block was coming apart. One of the mechanics spoke up. Why was he running that hot? The manual says 61 inches maximum. The chief looked at his clipboard. His maintenance log shows he has been running high power settings for the past 2 weeks, consistently above spec. Either he did not know what he was doing, or he was ignoring the limits. Johnson felt his stomach tighten. He glanced at Harmon. Harmon's face was stone, but his jaw was clenched. The chief continued, "We are going to inspect every Mustang in the squadron. If we find any other aircraft running outside normal parameters, those planes are grounded until we figure out what is going on. Understood?" The mechanics nodded. The group broke up. Harmon walked toward the hangar without looking at Johnson. Johnson followed him. He waited until they were alone, then spoke quietly. "Davis was not using modified fuel, was he?" Harmon kept walking. "No, but he was trying to push his engine harder. Probably heard about your kills and figured he could do the same thing. He did not understand the difference between high-octane fuel and just slamming the throttle forward." "They are going to inspect my plane." "I know." "If they find the fuel mixture, we are finished." Harmon stopped and turned around. "Then we drain it. Tonight. Before the inspection. We replace it with standard fuel and hope nobody notices the discrepancy in the consumption logs." Johnson shook his head. "If we drain it now, I lose the advantage. I go back to flying a normal Mustang. That means I go back to watching people die because I cannot keep up. And if we do not drain it, you go to prison. Possibly me too. Is that worth it?" Johnson stepped closer. "Davis died because he did not know what he was doing. I know what I am doing. The fuel works. You have seen the results. 7 kills in 2 weeks. That is not luck. That is a better airplane." Harmon exhaled slowly. "You are not listening. The chief just said they are inspecting every plane in the squadron. That means they are going to pull fuel samples. They are going to test octane levels. When they find out your fuel is different, they are going to ask why. And when they ask why, what are you going to tell them?" Johnson looked out at the flight line. A dozen Mustangs sat in neat rows, their silver fuselages gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Each one represented a pilot. Each pilot represented someone back home who was waiting for them to come back alive. "I will tell them the truth," Johnson said. "I will tell them I found a way to make the airplane faster. I will tell them it works. And I will tell them they should be using it on every plane in the Air Force." Harmon stared at him. "You think they are going to thank you? You think they are going to pin a medal on your chest for violating a dozen regulations? I think they care about winning the war. They care about order. They care about rules. You broke the rules. That is all they are going to see." Johnson turned to face him. "Then help me make sure they see something else. Help me prove that this works. Not just for me, for everyone." Harmon was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You are insane. Maybe, but I am also right." That night, Harmon did not drain the fuel. Instead, he did something more dangerous. He wrote everything down. He sat in the hangar with a notebook and documented every detail of the modified fuel mixture, the octane ratings, the blend ratio, the performance improvements, the engine temperature limits, the risks. He wrote it all in clear, precise language, the kind of language that engineers and officers would understand. When he finished, he had a 6-page report that explained exactly what Johnson had been doing and why it worked. He showed it to Johnson the next morning. "If they find the fuel, we give them this. We do not hide it. We do not apologize. We show them the data, and we make the case that this is an operational advantage. Johnson read through the report. It was thorough. It was professional. It was also a confession. "You realize this document is evidence of a court-martial offense," Johnson said. "I realize that if we are going to break the rules, we better have a good reason. This is the reason." The inspection began 2 days later. 3 maintenance officers went through every Mustang in the squadron, checking fuel samples, engine logs, and performance metrics. They spent an hour on each aircraft. When they reached Johnson's plane, Harmon was standing nearby, holding the notebook. The lead inspector pulled a fuel sample and held it up to the light. He frowned. Then he pulled a testing kit from his bag and ran a quick analysis. His frown deepened. He turned to Harmon. "This fuel is not standard 100-octane. "No, sir, it is not." The inspector's voice went cold. "Who authorized this modification?" "No one, sir. It was an independent decision made by Lieutenant Johnson and myself." The other 2 inspectors stopped what they were doing and walked over. The lead inspector set down the fuel sample. "You understand that unauthorized modifications to military aircraft are a violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice," Harmon interrupted. "Yes, sir. I am aware." The inspector stared at him. "Then why did you do it?" Harmon handed him the notebook. "Because it works, sir, and I can prove it." The inspector opened the notebook and began reading. His expression shifted from anger to confusion to something else. Interest. He read for 5 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. "You are telling me this fuel mixture increases engine output by 200 horsepower?" "Approximately, sir, with proper throttle management and temperature monitoring." "And Lieutenant Johnson has been using this for how long?" 2 weeks. The inspector flipped through the pages. "According to this, he has 7 confirmed kills in that time period." "Correct, sir." The inspector closed the notebook. He looked at Johnson's Mustang, then back at Harmon. "Wait here." He walked away with the notebook. The other 2 inspectors followed. Harmon and Johnson stood in silence. 10 minutes later, the lead inspector returned. He was accompanied by the squadron commander, a lieutenant colonel named Brennan. Brennan was holding the notebook. Brennan looked at Johnson. "Is this accurate? You have been flying combat missions with unauthorized fuel modifications?" "Yes, sir." "And you did not think to report this to your commanding officer?" "I did not think you would approve, sir." Brennan's jaw tightened. "You are damn right I would not have approved. You put yourself at risk. You put your aircraft at risk. And if this had gone wrong, you could have caused a catastrophic failure over enemy territory." Johnson met his eyes. "With respect, sir, the only thing that went wrong was that I did not start doing this sooner. 7 kills in 2 weeks? That is more than I had in the previous 8 months combined." Brennan looked down at the notebook. He read for a moment, then looked at the lead inspector. "Can this be replicated? Can we produce this fuel mixture at scale?" The inspector hesitated. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require access to higher octane fuel stocks and approval from Supply Command. It would also require retraining pilots on engine management. The margin for error is small." Brennan nodded slowly. He turned back to Johnson. "You are grounded, effective immediately. Do not fly. Do not touch an aircraft. Do not leave this base. We are going to run tests on this fuel mixture. If it works the way you say it does, maybe we can use it. If it does not, you are going to face a court-martial. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Brennan walked away. The inspectors followed. Harmon let out a long breath. "Well," Harmon said quietly, "that could have gone worse." Johnson watched them disappear into the operations building. Or it could have gone better. For the next week, Johnson was confined to base. He watched other pilots fly missions while he sat in the barracks. He listened to the debriefings. He heard about the kills. He heard about the losses. On the 8th day, Brennan called him into his office. Brennan was sitting behind his desk, the notebook open in front of him. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Lieutenant." Johnson sat. Brennan leaned back. "We tested your fuel mixture. We ran it through 3 different engines under controlled conditions. It performed exactly as you described. Higher power output, higher fuel consumption, higher engine temperatures. But it works." Johnson felt his pulse quicken. "Does that mean—" "It means you are no longer grounded. It also means you are going back up tomorrow with a full tank of the modified fuel. But this time, you are not going alone." Brennan slid a sheet of paper across the desk. It was a mission briefing, a bomber escort run deep into Germany. High risk, high priority. "There is a Luftwaffe airfield near Berlin that has been causing problems for our bomber groups. Intelligence says they have some of their best pilots stationed there. We are sending a strike package to hit the field. You are going to be part of the escort." Johnson looked at the briefing. "How many fighters are we expecting?" Brennan met his eyes. "A lot. And they are not going to run away when they see you coming. This is their home territory. They are going to fight." Johnson nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" 0600 tomorrow. Get some rest." Johnson stood and walked to the door. He paused. "Sir, what about Harmon? Is he facing charges?" Brennan shook his head. "Harmon is being reassigned. We are putting him in charge of a new program to develop high-performance fuel mixtures for operational use. Turns out, breaking the rules is fine as long as it works." Johnson smiled slightly. "Thank you, sir." He left the office and walked back to the flight line. His Mustang was sitting on the hardstand, freshly fueled and armed. The modified fuel was in the tanks. The guns were loaded. Tomorrow, he was going back to war. But this time, everyone was going to be watching. The flak started at 22,000 feet. Black puffs of smoke appeared in the sky ahead, blooming like poisonous flowers. Each burst was an 88-millimeter shell filled with shrapnel, designed to tear aircraft apart. The bomber formation flew straight through it. They had no choice. Their target was the Luftwaffe airfield at Rechlin, 30 miles southeast of Berlin, and the only way to reach it was through the flak corridor. Johnson flew 200 yards off the bomber's right wing. His squadron was spread out in a defensive screen, 12 Mustangs covering 40 B-17s. The modified fuel was in his tanks. His guns were loaded. His engine was running smooth. He scanned the sky. Clear blue above, scattered clouds below. No enemy fighters yet. But they were coming. They always came. The radio crackled. "Blue Flight, this is Overwatch. We have multiple bogies inbound from the northeast. High altitude, estimate 20 plus. 20 fighters, maybe more." Johnson felt his heartbeat pick up. This was not going to be a quick engagement. This was going to be a brawl. The squadron leader's voice came through. "Blue Flight, maintain formation. Stay with the bombers until contact." Johnson keyed his mic. "Blue 3, copy." He checked his fuel gauge. Full tanks. He checked his manifold pressure. 61 inches. Standard power. He would stay at standard until he needed more. No sense burning through the modified fuel before the fight started. 2 minutes passed. The flak stopped. That was the signal. The German gunners had stopped firing because their own fighters were moving in. Johnson saw them at 10 o'clock high. A formation of Focke-Wulf 190s, maybe 15 of them, diving out of the sun. Classic attack position. They were going for the bombers. The squadron leader's voice cut through the radio. "Blue flight, engage, break right and climb." The Mustang formation split apart. Half went right, half went left. Johnson shoved his throttle forward and pulled into a climbing turn. The manifold pressure gauge jumped to 70 inches, then 75. The Mustang surged forward. The acceleration pressed him back into his seat. He pulled harder on the stick, tightening the turn. His vision started to gray at the edges from the G-forces. He blinked hard and kept pulling. The lead Focke-Wulf was 300 yards ahead, lining up on a B-17. Johnson centered him in his gun sight and fired. The tracers reached out across the sky. Most of them missed, but a few hit the German fighter's tail section. Pieces of metal flew off. The Focke-Wulf rolled away and broke off the attack. Johnson did not follow. He was already looking for the next target. There, 2 o'clock low. Another Focke-Wulf climbing back toward the bomber formation after a failed pass. Johnson pushed the throttle to maximum, 80 inches of manifold pressure. The engine roared. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour. He dove on the German fighter and opened fire at 200 yards. This time, every round hit. The Focke-Wulf's canopy shattered. The engine cowling exploded in a spray of oil and coolant. The fighter flipped over and went into a flat spin. Johnson saw the pilot bail out, his parachute snapping open a few seconds later. One down. Johnson pulled out of the dive and scanned the sky. Chaos everywhere. Mustangs and Focke-Wulfs tangled together in a dozen separate dogfights. Tracers crisscrossed the air. 2 bombers were trailing smoke. 1 Mustang was on fire, spiraling down. Johnson's engine temperature gauge was climbing. He was at 7,800 feet now, and the air was thinner, less cooling. He had maybe 3 minutes before he had to throttle back. He spotted another target, a Messerschmitt Bf 109, painted in the yellow nose markings of an elite unit. The pilot was good. He was stalking a lone Mustang, staying in the blind spot, waiting for the right moment to fire. Johnson turned hard and dove. The Messerschmitt pilot saw him at the last second and broke left. Too late. Johnson fired a short burst. The rounds punched through the 109's wing root. Fuel sprayed out. A second later, the wing ignited. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted and fell. The pilot did not bail out. 2 down. Johnson's radio exploded with voices. "Blue 6, I have 2 on my tail. Overwatch, we need support on the left flank. Somebody get this guy off me." Johnson looked left and saw a Mustang in trouble. 2 Focke-Wulfs were on him, taking turns firing. The Mustang was weaving desperately, but he was losing speed. In another 10 seconds, he would be dead. Johnson pushed the throttle to the stop and dove. His airspeed hit 460 miles per hour. The Mustang was shaking violently. He ignored it. He closed the distance in seconds. The trailing Focke-Wulf never saw him. Johnson fired from 150 yards. The German fighter disintegrated. Literally disintegrated. The wings folded up. The fuselage broke in half. Pieces tumbled through the sky. The second Focke-Wulf broke off immediately and ran. Johnson started to follow, then saw his engine temperature gauge. Red line. He throttled back to 61 inches. The temperature started to drop. 3 down. The Mustang he had saved waggled its wings in thanks and climbed back toward the bomber formation. Johnson did the same. The bombers were still on course, still heading for the target. Half the German fighters had broken off. The other half were regrouping for another pass. Johnson checked his ammunition. He had used about a third of his rounds. Plenty left. He checked his fuel. Still over half tanks, but the modified mixture burned faster. He would have maybe 20 minutes of flight time before he had to head home. The German fighters came in again. This time from 12 o'clock level, a head-on attack. Aggressive. Dangerous for both sides. Johnson did not flinch. He flew straight at them. At 1,000 yards, he opened fire. So did they. The sky between the two formations filled with tracers. It looked like a tunnel of light. At 500 yards, the German formation broke. They scattered left and right, trying to avoid the head-on collision. Johnson picked one and stayed on him. The Focke-Wulf rolled right and dove. Johnson followed. The German pilot was good. He used every trick. Barrel rolls, split S maneuvers, snap turns. None of it mattered. Johnson stayed with him. The modified fuel gave him the power to match every move. At 300 yards, he fired. The Focke-Wulf's tail section tore off. The fighter went into an uncontrollable spin. 4 down. Johnson pulled up and climbed back to altitude. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline and exhaustion. He had been in continuous combat for less than 4 minutes, but it felt like an hour. He scanned the sky again. Most of the German fighters were gone. A few were still harassing the bombers, but the Mustang escorts were driving them off. The bomber formation was holding together. They would reach the target. Johnson keyed his radio. Blue leader, this is Blue 3. 4 confirmed kills. Low on fuel. Requesting permission to RTB. The squadron leader responded immediately. Blue 3, stay with the formation. We are not clear yet. Johnson looked at his fuel gauge. He had maybe 15 minutes left. Not enough to escort the bombers all the way to the target and back. He would have to leave early or risk running out of fuel over Germany. And then he saw them. 6 more Focke-Wulfs coming in from the north. Fresh fighters, full ammunition. They were moving fast, diving on the bombers from above. Johnson did not ask for permission. He shoved the throttle forward and turned to intercept. 80 inches of manifold pressure. The engine screamed. The airspeed indicator climbed. Johnson closed the distance in 30 seconds. The lead Focke-Wulf was lining up on a damaged B-17 that was already trailing smoke from one engine. Johnson fired from 400 yards. Long range. Low probability. But he hit. The rounds tore through the Focke-Wulf's cockpit. The fighter rolled over and fell away. 5 down. The other 5 German fighters scattered. But one of them made a mistake. He turned toward Johnson instead of away. A challenge. Or maybe just inexperience. Johnson accepted. He pulled into a tight turn, matching the German pilot move for move. They circled each other at 300 miles per hour, each trying to get on the other's tail. The turn tightened. Johnson felt the G-forces crushing him. His vision tunneled. He grunted and tensed his leg muscles, forcing blood back to his brain. The German pilot made his mistake. He tried to extend out of the turn to gain speed. That gave Johnson half a second. Half a second was enough. Johnson fired. A 3-second burst. The Focke-Wulf's engine exploded. Fire erupted from the cowling. The pilot bailed out immediately, his parachute streaming behind him. 6 down. Johnson's engine temperature gauge was past red line. His fuel gauge was in the yellow. His ammunition counter showed less than 100 rounds remaining. He throttled back and turned west, heading for home. Behind him, the bomber formation continued toward the target. The remaining German fighters had broken off. The sky was clearing. Johnson flew for 10 minutes in silence. His hands were still shaking. His heart was still pounding. He replayed the engagement in his head. 6 kills. 6 German fighters in less than 6 minutes of continuous combat. It was the most successful single engagement of his entire combat career. Maybe one of the most successful in the entire war. And it had only been possible because of the fuel. He crossed back into Allied airspace and began his descent toward the base. The radio was busy with other pilots calling in their status. Some were damaged, some were low on fuel. One was not responding at all. Johnson landed 20 minutes later. The ground crew was waiting. So was the squadron commander. Brennan walked up as Johnson climbed out of the cockpit. His face was unreadable. 6 kills? Yes, sir. Brennan looked at the Mustang. The engine cowling was scorched black. The gun barrels were still smoking. The entire aircraft reeked of burned fuel and cordite. Your engine is cooked, Brennan said. You are going to need a full rebuild. Yes, sir. Was it worth it? Johnson thought about the B-17 he had saved, the one that was trailing smoke. That bomber had 10 men on board. If the Focke-Wulf had gotten through, all 10 would be dead. Yes, sir. It was worth it. Brennan nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand. Good work, Lieutenant. Johnson shook it. Then he walked to the debriefing room, where he would spend the next hour explaining exactly what had happened in those 6 minutes over Germany. The telegram arrived 3 days later. Johnson was in the mess hall eating breakfast when a sergeant found him. The sergeant handed him a sealed envelope marked "Confidential" and walked away without saying a word. Johnson opened it at the table. Lieutenant Robert Johnson. Stop, you are ordered to report to 8th Air Force Headquarters. London stop, EO 900 hours. 18 March. Stop, do not discuss this order with anyone. Stop. Johnson read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. Across the table, another pilot named Reynolds was watching him. Bad news? Reynolds asked. Just paperwork, Johnson said. He finished his breakfast and went back to his barracks. He sat on his bunk and tried to figure out what was happening. Orders to headquarters in London. Confidential. Do not discuss with anyone. That was not normal. That was the kind of order you got when something had gone seriously wrong, or when someone important wanted to talk to you. The next morning, Johnson caught a transport flight to London. He spent the flight trying to guess what was waiting for him. A commendation? A promotion? A court-martial? All 3 seemed equally possible. The transport landed at a military airfield outside London. A staff car was waiting. The driver took him directly to 8th Air Force Headquarters, a massive stone building that had once been a private estate. Johnson had never been inside. He was escorted to the 3rd floor and told to wait in a conference room. The room had a long wooden table, 12 chairs, and a map of Europe, covering one entire wall. Johnson sat down and waited. 10 minutes later, the door opened. 3 men walked in. The first was a brigadier general named Caldwell. Johnson recognized him from briefings. Caldwell was in charge of fighter operations for the entire 8th Air Force. The second man was a colonel Johnson did not know. The third man was not military at all. He wore a civilian suit and carried a leather briefcase. He looked like a lawyer. Caldwell gestured for Johnson to remain seated. "At ease, Lieutenant. This is Colonel Pierce from the Inspector General's office, and this is Mr. Harrison from the War Department." Johnson nodded. His stomach was tight. Inspector General meant investigation. War Department meant politics. Caldwell sat down across from him. "Lieutenant, you recently completed a combat mission over Germany, during which you shot down 6 enemy aircraft in approximately 6 minutes. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you accomplished this using a modified fuel mixture that increased your aircraft's engine performance beyond standard specifications. Also correct?" "Yes, sir." Caldwell folded his hands on the table. "That fuel modification was unauthorized. It violated maintenance protocols, safety regulations, and operational procedures. Under normal circumstances, that would result in disciplinary action. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." "However, these are not normal circumstances. Your actions, while technically in violation of regulations, resulted in a significant operational success. 6 confirmed kills. 0 friendly losses in your immediate area. The bomber formation reached its target intact. From a purely tactical standpoint, what you did worked." Johnson said nothing. He could feel the "but" coming. Caldwell continued. "The problem is that your success has created a situation we need to manage very carefully. Word of your modified fuel has spread throughout the squadron. Other pilots are asking questions. Mechanics are asking questions. And now, people outside the military are asking questions." Harrison, the civilian, opened his briefcase and pulled out a newspaper. He slid it across the table. It was a copy of Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. The headline read, "Pilot's Secret Fuel Gives Mustang Super Performance." Johnson felt his pulse quicken. "How did they find out?" "Somebody talked," Caldwell said. "We do not know who, but the story is out there now. And it is not just Stars and Stripes. The Associated Press has picked it up. The New York Times is running a piece tomorrow. This is becoming a public relations issue." Colonel Pierce spoke for the first time. His voice was cold. "Lieutenant, do you understand what happens when a story like this gets into the newspapers? The enemy reads newspapers. The Germans now know that we have developed a high-performance fuel modification for our fighters. They are going to start looking for ways to counter it. They might develop their own version, or they might develop tactics to exploit its weaknesses. You have given them intelligence." Johnson felt anger rising in his chest. "With respect, sir, I gave us an advantage. The Germans have been ahead of us in fighter performance since the start of the war. We are finally catching up. That is not intelligence. That is progress." Pierce leaned forward. "It is intelligence when it compromises operational security, and it is a problem when it creates unrealistic expectations. Do you know how much 130-octane fuel exists in the entire European theater? Not much. Barely enough to supply one squadron for a few weeks. If every pilot starts demanding modified fuel, we cannot deliver. And when we cannot deliver, morale suffers." Caldwell held up a hand. "That is enough, Colonel." He turned back to Johnson. "Lieutenant, here is the situation. The modified fuel works. We know that. You proved it. But we cannot scale it up to the entire Air Force. Not yet. The supply chain is not there. The training is not there. And frankly, the political will is not there. The brass in Washington does not want to authorize a program that might result in more engine failures like the one that killed Davis. Davis died because he did not know what he was doing, Johnson said. With proper training, maybe we could make it work, Caldwell interrupted. But that training takes time, and time is something we do not have. The invasion of Europe is coming. Every resource, every gallon of fuel, every spare part is being allocated for that operation. We cannot afford to divert supplies for an experimental fuel program right now. Johnson stared at him. So what are you saying? Harrison spoke up. What we are saying, Lieutenant, is that this story needs to go away. Quietly. We need to control the narrative before it gets out of hand. How? Caldwell slid a document across the table. It was a typed statement on official letterhead. Johnson picked it up and read. The statement said that the reports of modified fuel were exaggerated. It said that Johnson's success was due to superior tactics and skill, not to any unauthorized modifications. It said that all aircraft in the 8th Air Force operated within standard specifications and that any rumors to the contrary were false. It was a lie. A complete, official lie. Johnson looked up. You want me to say this did not happen? We want you to say it was not as significant as the newspapers are claiming, Caldwell said. We want you to downplay it. Make it sound routine. Take the spotlight off the fuel and put it back on you. Heroic pilot uses superior tactics to defeat the enemy. That is the story we want. And if I refuse? The room went silent. Caldwell and Pierce exchanged a glance. Harrison closed his briefcase. Caldwell spoke carefully. If you refuse, we will be forced to open a formal investigation into your unauthorized modifications. That investigation will likely result in disciplinary action. You could be grounded. You could be reassigned. And Sergeant Harmon, who helped you, will also face consequences. Is that what you want? Johnson felt his jaw tighten. They were threatening him. Politely, professionally. But it was still a threat. He looked down at the statement again. Then he looked at the map of Europe on the wall. He thought about all the pilots still flying missions. He thought about all the fights still to come. He thought about the invasion that was coming, the one that would decide the war. If he refused to sign, he would be grounded. Harmon would be punished, and the modified fuel program, the thing that could save lives, would be buried under bureaucracy and politics. If he signed, the story would go away. The program would continue quietly. Maybe it would be ready for the next phase of the war. Maybe. Johnson picked up a pen. If I sign this, what happens to the fuel program? Caldwell leaned back. It continues. Quietly. We are setting up a small test unit to refine the mixture and develop proper training protocols. Harmon is running it. If it proves viable, we will roll it out after the invasion. But it stays classified. No more newspaper stories. No more publicity. And me? You go back to your squadron. You fly missions. You do not talk about the fuel. You let this story die. Johnson looked at the statement one more time. Then he signed it. Caldwell took the document and stood up. Thank you, Lieutenant. You are dismissed. Johnson stood and walked to the door. He paused and turned back. Sir, can I ask a question? Go ahead. If the fuel works, and we know it works, why are we hiding it? Caldwell was silent for a moment. Then he said, Because the military does not like surprises, Lieutenant. And you surprised us. We do not know how to handle surprises. We handle orders, plans, procedures. What you did was outside all of that, so now we have to figure out how to make it fit. That takes time." Johnson nodded. He left the room and walked out of the building. The staff car was waiting to take him back to the airfield. On the flight back to his base, Johnson stared out the window at the English countryside below. He thought about the statement he had signed, the lie he had agreed to tell. He thought about Charlie Miller and the 3 pilots who had died on that mission 2 weeks ago. He thought about the 6 German fighters he had shot down. He wondered if any of it had mattered. 2 days later, Stars and Stripes ran a correction. The article said that earlier reports of modified fuel had been based on incomplete information. Lieutenant Robert Johnson's success was attributed to exceptional piloting skill, not to any special modifications. The Air Force confirmed that all aircraft were operating within normal parameters. The story disappeared from the newspapers. Most people forgot about it within a week. But Johnson did not forget. And neither did the pilots who knew the truth. 3 months later, on the morning of the D-Day invasion, Johnson flew his Mustang over the beaches of Normandy. His fuel tanks were filled with a new mixture, not quite as powerful as the experimental version he had used, but close. It had been tested, refined, and approved through proper channels. The program had a new name now: War Emergency Power. It was no longer illegal. It was standard procedure. Johnson never got credit for it. The official history would say that war emergency power was developed by military engineers through systematic testing and evaluation. No mention of a mechanic mixing fuel in a hangar at midnight. No mention of a pilot who decided that following orders was less important than winning the war. That was fine with Johnson. He did not need credit. He just needed the fuel to work. And it did. For the rest of the war, every Mustang in the European theater flew with war emergency power available at the push of a button. Thousands of pilots used it. Hundreds of lives were saved because of it. The official record never mentioned how it started. But the pilots knew. They always knew. In the barracks and the mess halls, when the officers were not listening, they told the story. The story of the pilot who broke the rules, risked everything, and gave them the power to fight back. The story of the illegal fuel that changed the war